a lot of detailed tracking studies that have been done now with these miniaturized um, uh, transponder type devices that track a bird's movement continuously. And so all of the black and white warblers are not following the same route, even if they're going to the same region. And they don't necessarily follow the same route every year. They choose different routes, sometimes go across the Gulf of Mexico, sometimes go around. Um, and all of that is just flexibility in the system. And yeah, so it's amazing that they still have the kind of precision that they do along with that flexibility. It's still a mystery.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Ask the Expert event. Today, we're going to be learning about birds with expert David Allen Sibley. I'm Craig LeMoult, I'm a GBH news reporter and a fan of birds. And I want to begin by thanking everybody that's joining us today, including our Champion Circle and our Beacon Circle members. We really appreciate all your continued generous support. But let's get started. It's my huge pleasure to introduce David Allen Sibley. David is the author and illustrator of a series of hugely successful guides to nature, including, of course, the Sibley Guide to Birds. He's contributed to Smithsonian, to Science, to the Wilson Journal of Ornithology, to birding, birdwatching, North American Birds, and, of course, the New York Times. He's the recipient of the Roger Tory Peterson Award for Lifetime Achievement from the American Birding Association, and many other well-deserved honors and awards. And he lives and birds here in Massachusetts. David, thank you so much for joining us. It's so great to talk to you again.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for hosting this, and also thanks to everybody who's showing up. I can't wait to hear all your questions.
Yes, we always get great questions from the audience, and we're going to get to those in just a minute. I have a couple questions I want to ask first. And the first thing I always like to ask you is sort of what's going on right now. If we were to go outside and check out the birds, what should we be looking for? What's happening at this moment?
Yeah, it's well, there's always something with birds. There's always something going on, and they're constantly moving, even though it's kind of the tail end of the migration season, but there's still a lot of movement going on. Um, it's actually around just past the peak of migration for some of the water birds, like ducks and geese. And they're still moving. Well, they move all winter, just with weather conditions. When it gets cold and the water freezes, they move south. When the water thaws, they come back north again. So that's going on. And it's been such a mild fall, and there's still a lot of natural food out there.
Yeah.
Plus the really wet summer here in Massachusetts. The plants produced a lot of seeds and fruit, and the birds are really enjoying that. So a lot of people, I suspect, are probably seeing fewer birds than normal at their bird feeders. And I think the reason for that is not anything to worry about. It's just that the birds have a lot of natural food that they can take advantage of. There's still no snow cover, and the natural food, all the seeds and fruit, is still abundant out there. So there's no need for the birds to come into the feeders.
Okay. Any particular birds that when you go out today, that you're looking for?
Just this morning, I had an odd combination, an eastern phoebe, which is a summer resident, and it's getting very late for them, but one just showed up in our yard this morning, acting like it was October 1st. And
it is 60-something degrees out there today. So is that why they're still around?
Yeah, there's still a lot of insects active. And so and phoebe is another species that they're migratory, but they'll take advantage of weather conditions and move north and south just depending on the current conditions. They're not the obligate migrants like some of the other flycatchers that really want to be in South America now and far away from any chance of frost. But the phoebes will kind of play the edges like this.
Okay. So I want to ask you about something that's actually kind of been rocking the birding world that I've been hearing about. I heard a story on NPR 2 weeks ago. So it's gone beyond just the birding world, and the whole world knows about it now. The American Ornithological Society is vowing to change the English names of all bird species currently named after people. All birds named after people. I guess along with other bird names that they deem might be offensive or exclusionary. I'm so curious what you think of this. What do you think of changing the names of all birds that have a human name associated with them?
Yeah, my initial reaction a few years ago when I first heard rumblings about this was, um, why is that necessary? We really don't need to change all these names. They're names that I grew up with, names that have been in place for 200 years in many cases. And but as I started to learn about some of the history of the names, the example that I like to highlight is a bird called Scott's oriole. It's found in the American Southwest and Mexico, and it's named for a General Winfield Scott from the mid 1800s. And he was a very highly regarded general, but had no documented interest in birds. There's no evidence that he even acknowledged the fact that a bird had been named for him. It was named by a junior officer, presumably hoping for some recognition or promotion. And Scott, among other things, he presided over the Trail of Tears, the forced removal of Cherokee from Georgia to Oklahoma. And once I learned that, it's very uncomfortable to say the name Scott's oriole.
Yeah, right.
And that's one of the worst examples. But virtually every bird that's named for a person is named for a white European man. And those were the people who were doing ornithology, and all of their wealth and their leisure that allowed them to do ornithology, that privilege, was based on the structure of society at the time, which considered many other people sort of subhuman. So it's an uncomfortable thing once you start thinking about it that way. And the simplest thing is just to change all of the names. And then you don't even have to get into why, sort of case by case.
Yeah, it's not like they're just
changed.
going to say, well, we'll change these ones that have these associated with these individual people. It's just like any one that has a human name associated with it is going to be changed. And I mean, presumably there's some nice people who have birds named after them too, but it's just like across the board, let's just change them all. Does that seem like the right way to go for you?
Yeah, because it gets so messy when you start thinking about making judgments individually about that. And I don't think, someone like Audubon, I guess there's evidence he supported slavery. He owned slaves, and it was, so that's a very uncomfortable truth. And but I don't think he was a bad person based on all the other things. This is not to say that these people were all bad. I think if Audubon had been born in 1970, he wouldn't be enslaving people or supporting slavery. It was the sign of the times. So that's just to say that I'm supporting this name change, not because I think the people were all bad, but just because it's a reminder of this uncomfortable history.
For someone like yourself, I'm just wondering about what that's going to be like going forward, right? I mean, so much of your expertise has been in knowing these bird names, right? So every time you identify one of these birds now, it's going to be like, well, that's this one, it used to be called that, but it's now this. Like, there's like a whole new kind of set of knowledge that you have to have. It's going to change everything that a lot of what you know about these names and identifying these birds.
Yeah, bird names change regularly. Every year there's a few names that change, and there were some big, large scale changes early in my birding career, 50 years ago. So names change. It's tough for the people who have been birding a long time because we know the names that we've been using our whole lives, and now they're changing. But the young birders have no problem. They learn the birds with the new names, and it'll be these name changes will happen over a period of years. It's going to take years.
To that point, though, in terms of learning the new names, I would think that maybe you stand to gain the most from new names of these birds, because you sell all these bird guides, and now do you have to go through and change all the names and sell new editions?
Well, generally I don't. I don't put out a new edition just for new names. There's a lot of names that have changed since 2014 is when the latest edition of my big bird guide came out. Quite a few names have changed since then, and that doesn't really prompt me to put out a new edition. There are many other changes that would also be in a new edition. And a lot of people on social media, I'm hearing an idea that I really like, which is just to publish a set of stickers with the new names that people can paste into their book to change the names without having to buy a new book. So I'm all in favor of that. And this is not there's nothing greedy or capitalist about me supporting these name changes. I support the name changes because I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, the stickers is a good solution. I want to jump in. We have already just a ton of great questions popping in, and I want to get right to them. We hear from Jerome, who lives in Carlisle, who says, "I have bird feeders in my backyard. I recently installed a feeder in the front yard. Within 12 hours, the birds were at that feeder. How do they find it? Vision, smell, curiosity?"
Yeah, they maybe all of those things. They obviously have, if you've already been feeding the birds, they have a search image for a bird feeder, and so they'll recognize that. They'll see, and they're probably familiar with other bird feeders in the neighborhood. So yeah, they'll be cued in on the feeders, and as soon as one bird finds it, other birds notice that, hey, that's the second time that bird has flown over there and flown away with a seed. I'm going to check that out.
We know enough about their calls that one of them might be being like, "Hey guys, check this out."
Yeah, and the black-capped chickadees are often one of the first birds to discover a feeder, and they're very curious. They're always inspecting twigs and leaves, and they're often one of the first species to find a bird feeder, and they travel in small social groups. So when one bird finds the bird feeder, they also store food. So they'll take seeds away from the feeder and hide them in crevices and for later use. So a group of chickadees, a little clan of 6 or 8 chickadees, will then start going to the feeder, grabbing seeds and carrying them off to hide them in the woods.
There's something going on in Carlisle, because all the top questions right now are from Carlisle is really interested and involved today, which is great to hear from Carlisle. This is from Anne in Carlisle. It says, "We've seen 2 pairs of swans in a local pond on conservation land for a couple of weeks now. Unusual for us. We occasionally see a swan or two early in the year, but have not seen them this late. Where do they spend the winter?"
So the species that's expected here in Massachusetts is called mute swan. It's introduced from Europe, native to Europe, and introduced here. And they'll occupy any small pond, marshy area, and stay as long as the water is liquid, until the water freezes. This time of year, they might be moving into those ponds from other places. Maybe they've come from farther north where the water's already frozen. When that pond freezes, they'll move to the coast, most likely, Boston Harbor or Rhode Island or something like that, and spend some time on salt water until the ponds thaw out again, and then they'll be back.
Okay, so they're not going to go much further south.
No, that species is not really migratory. They just move as needed to find water that they can swim in. Because they feed on the aquatic plants that are underneath the water. So they'll
Okay.
just move to saltwater when the fresh water freezes, maybe a couple 100 miles at the most.
Okay. We have a question from Homer about migrations. He just wants to hear more about bird migrations. And I think that they are one of the most amazing things about birds, to think how far they go. Can you just speak to us a little bit about some of the birds that we do see around here, and how far they go, and how do they do that?
Yeah, yes. Well, those are big questions,
Big
and
questions.
yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Migration is one of the most amazing and fascinating things about birds, um, and every species is different. Every species migrates in a slightly different way. I mentioned the swans. They don't technically migrate; they just move to find open water. Um, the phoebes migrate relatively short distances. They spend the summer here and the winter in the southeastern US, maybe as far north as North Carolina. Um, and other species like barn swallow nests here in Massachusetts and then migrates. They eat insects like phoebes, but they rely completely on flying insects. So they can only survive in a place where enough small insects are actually in the air that they can fly around and catch. So they migrate all the way to South America and even southern South America. Argentina is where many of our barn swallows are right now, thousands of miles away. And they do that on a schedule that keeps them clear of any risk of frost. So they're generally gone in August. By the end of August, they're mostly gone. And some of them are already in South America by the beginning of August. Um, and then every variation in between. And most birds don't migrate strictly north to south. There's a lot of east-west component. So species that, a lot of the juncos that we're seeing here now, the dark-eyed juncos that come here for the winter, there's a few that nest in Massachusetts, and they probably spend the winter close by. But others nest in all the way across Canada to Alaska. And juncos that nest in the Yukon, some of them migrate to winter in the northeastern US. So there's a big east to west component. A lot of species that nest in Alaska migrate through the eastern US as they head south. And part of that is the geography. If you look at a globe, our longitude here in Massachusetts is about the same as the Pacific coast of South America. So birds that are heading for the Amazon and eastern Brazil have to go a long way east, even from here. But in order to get there, unless a few species fly over the ocean directly from Massachusetts to South America, but most species want to stay over land. And so they have to begin their migration going southwest to get to, say, Texas, and then turn southeast to get to northern South America.
It's incredible.
So
It's kind of mind-blowing that it's possible.
It's incredibly varied.
Yeah. We have a question from Susie, who asks, she says, my bird friends are picky eaters. Any advice on the best all-around food to provide?
I have settled on the best all-around food being sunflower hearts, or sunflower chips, the already shelled sunflower seeds. It's a food that all the birds like. It's high in fat. So it's really...
Do you like the shell just because it's a lot less mess to clean up underneath the bird feeder?
It's less mess to clean up, and more birds can get access to that. Once the shell's off, almost any bird, even a pine siskin, a goldfinch, relatively small-billed finches, can consume those seeds. The sunflower seeds in the shells, it's a little bit more work, and some species can't really get to the meat of that. So sunflower hearts, it's accessible to any bird, and really high quality food. It's a little bit, and no mess on the ground of all the shells.
Which could be like, I mean, I've raked up piles of those seeds underneath.
Yeah, it accumulates. And it's more expensive on the, in the first, just objectively more, it costs more to buy it. But when you think about the weight of the shells that you're not buying and just the higher quality food, it's not actually that much more expensive than other kinds of food. So right now, as I said at the beginning, you're kind of competing with the natural food that's out there. And for birds to leave their shelter of their dense thicket or wherever they're hiding out, for them to leave that and come into your yard, you have to give them something worthwhile.
You gotta make it worth it, yeah.
And sunflower hearts will often do that. The birds are constantly making that sort of assessment of, is it worth the extra travel to get to the bird feeder? And if it's just sort of millet, the mixed bird food that you buy at the supermarket, for many birds, it's not worth it. Not worth the risk.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that millet, because a lot of times you get this mix and there's just little tiny little bits in there, and they don't really, I guess, just some wrens and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's not really that great for them.
Yeah, a few species like that. Many species won't bother with it, and it's low in fat. It's less quality food, and so you end up attracting house sparrows and pigeons and mourning doves that will enjoy that particular kind of food, but the other birds will just kind of wave it off, say it's not worth the trouble, the risk, the time to fly over to that bird feeder.
Yeah, I definitely gotten a lot of house sparrows. Like that seems to be who's pretty psyched about that bird feeder.
Yeah.
We have a question. Let's see. We have a bunch of questions. One from Catherine says, do snowy owls migrate to elsewhere in Massachusetts besides Logan Airport? What kind of habitat do they prefer while they're here? That's from Catherine in Medway. I will say I once saw a snowy owl in Connecticut when I was living there. And we've certainly heard about them being at Logan. Maybe Logan's not the best place for bird interested people to go to, but where can they actually go and see a snowy owl? Are they around?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any being around this winter yet. Often the first ones are arriving right around now. So the habitat that they like is habitat that reminds them of the Arctic tundra, where they spend most of the year. So Logan Airport, it's perfect. It's flat, it's open, there's no trees. Right on the water. Other places where they are often found is like sand dunes out on Cape Cod along the shore. Plum Island at the northwest corner of Massachusetts on the coast around Newburyport. Those big salt marshes and sand dunes, barrier beaches. That's probably the best place in Massachusetts to see snowy owls.
Okay, Plum Island is the tip there. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And you can check out eBird and see what's being reported, but that's generally the best place to go.
Before we move on, tell me about that as a resource. Is that something that people should be looking at?
Yeah, eBird is it's a massive database of bird sightings that's maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and many of the active birders in Massachusetts submit lists of everything they've seen. So it's a great place, and you can just you don't even have to be a member to log in. You can just browse it as a anonymous person.
What's the website on that one? Is it easily searchable?
eBird, yeah, just type in eBird and you'll get there. EBIRD. Okay. And then you just explore, look at maps, look at lists, photographs. There's a tremendous amount of information there.
Great. Okay, great. Don says, I'm on the coast of North Carolina and we see birds heading north in the fall. Is it because they're hunting for food in those forays?
Hmm. Um, yeah, some of it could be just local movements of birds moving around, like you said, looking for food. Um, uh, there is a phenomenon in the fall with land birds that so most land little songbirds like warblers, flycatchers, thrushes, they migrate at night, navigating by the stars, and they often end up with westerly winds pushing them out to the Atlantic coast here. So along the East Coast, um, a lot of small songbirds get pushed out to the coast and even offshore, and they don't want to be there. They want to be inland, away from the ocean. Um, and there seems to be a sort of instinctive response for them to fly northwest, um, which is usually the wind direction that has pushed them to the coast is a northwest wind. So they get up at dawn and they fly into the wind for a few hours. So along the coast, places like Cape May, New Jersey is famous for this morning flight. After a big night of migration, you get massive numbers of birds that are taking off and flying northwest, presumably trying to escape the coast, trying to get farther inland to more safety, more food, and a better place to launch their next night of migration. So that's another thing that you'll see in the fall, a lot of birds visibly flying north in the morning, but they've actually spent the whole night before that flying south.
Okay. Question from Don, who's in Laramie, Wyoming, who says, how do birds know when to migrate? Is it based on weather or day length or other factors? Do we know how climate change might affect the different kinds of migratory birds?
Yeah, great questions. Most of what birds do seems to be modulated by day length. They detect the changing length of the day, and their body reacts by different hormones that then kind of guide their behavior. So an urge to migrate happens as the days get shorter, and then is really triggered by, also probably triggered by cold weather, lack of food. Any of those things will prompt a bird to migrate. But a lot of it, like ones like the barn swallow I talked about, that they're probably strictly going by day length. Just and there are genes that are known to sort of be a clock monitor, so that they're keeping track of the time of year. And species, there's a really interesting study found barn swallows with two different variations of the clock gene, and some of them migrate early and some of them migrate late. There's variation in those kinds of things, and whichever one's more successful will gradually take over and become, the Darwin's survival of the fittest natural selection. There's variation, and the variation that is the most successful gets passed on to more offspring. And other species like geese are just responding to local conditions. They'll stay in one place, and until it gets too cold, the water starts to freeze, and then they move south. And what climate change is doing to all of that is species like geese, it's easy for them. They'll stay farther north longer if the weather is warmer. Something like a barn swallow, they just go south when their body tells them to go south, and come back north from South America when their body tells them to. But as the spring season gets earlier with climate change, the barn swallows start to miss out on the first week or two of spring here. And some of those long distance migrant birds are they're a little bit out of sync now with the earlier seasons. And they seem to be adjusting quickly. There was a lot of concern a couple decades ago about this happening, but the birds do seem to be adjusting quickly.
Hmm.
And it's not good. It's a lot of stress on their system, and it might be again the birds that do come back earlier are the ones that survive and pass on their earlier migration to their offspring. So it's adjusting quickly, but probably sort of also, I don't want to say culling or restricting the population, that only the early arriving ones are really successful, and their offspring will be successful, but they'll have to continue adjusting over the next many decades as the climate continues to change.
That makes so much sense, and it's really interesting and kind of troubling to hear that. I mean, because of course, one thing that climate change is not affecting is day length, right? But and if they're basing their
Yeah,
migration on the day length, they're sort of on the same schedule, but everything else is being, especially the plants coming out, the bugs, everything else is changing. So yeah,
yeah,
they might miss out.
yeah, exactly.
Super interesting. Okay. We have a question from Mark who wants to know why osprey go so far before returning here. How far do they go? Like, what's the osprey situation like? How far are they going?
Yeah, some ospreys go to South America.
Uh,
I guess most of the ospreys from Massachusetts winter in South America. Um,
is that, I mean, like ospreys are eating fish and the fish are still around all year long. So you would think that maybe they wouldn't have to migrate for so
yeah,
far to get to eat anyway.
yeah. In here in New England, it would get pretty hard to find fish, and the ocean does freeze sometimes. So, and especially the shallow water in the bays where the
Okay.
ospreys do their fishing, um,
Okay. Yeah. All
that
right.
does freeze,
It's on the shallow side. Yeah.
and then the fish get sort of dormant and go deeper, and so they do need to go south. There are a lot of ospreys that spend the winter in Florida, but I think most of the Massachusetts ospreys migrate much farther. Um, and once they get south of Florida, in the Caribbean, is, it's funny, people go there to snorkel to see all the fish, but those fish are not really available to the birds. They're a little bit too deep. Um, and so there isn't really an abundance of fish-eating birds in all the Caribbean islands. And I think once the ospreys go past Florida, they really have to go beyond into South America to find the abundance of fish that they really need.
Okay. Question here from Margie, who seems to be referencing some event that I have not heard about, and I'm wondering if you do. Margie asks, wondering if you could talk a little bit about the large gathering of crows in Lawrence. Are you
Oh
aware
yeah.
of what's going on in Lawrence? Is there some a murder, if you will, of crows?
Yes. Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, there is a huge crow roost in Lawrence,
Oh,
and along the river. It moves around a little bit in that part of the state, but for many, many years, there's been a very large roost of crows. So crows are very social, and uh, they gather in big communal roosts in the non-breeding season, mostly the fall, winter. And crows from a wide area, probably a 50-mile radius, crows fly to that roost to spend the night. Um, there is a uh, there is someone who is studying or monitoring that crow roost and has done a lot of uh, outreach, sort of social media, blog videos and such, promoting that amazing crow roost.
is it like unusual in size?
Uh, not particularly, but there are, it draws crows from such a large area. There aren't very many roosts like that. And that one is particularly accessible and well known. Um, so uh, it's being monitored and enjoyed, appreciated Um,
That's pretty
and
loud.
it must be. Um, and the birds tend to they'll gather in sort of staging areas before they go into the real roost. So many different areas around there will get crows gathering in the treetops an hour before sunset, and then they all move into their single roost area for the night.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a lot of there are a lot of theories of why birds would do that, and one of the theories leading theories for why birds gather in big roosts like that is for information exchange. That crows crows are gathering there from, say, a 50-mile radius. They've been out foraging all day, and the crows that come back really fat and happy will be noticed by the other crows, and more birds will join them to go back to wherever they were feeding the day before. So it's a chance for the crows to sort of not necessarily share information, but spy on their neighbors and see who seems to be doing well. I'm going to tag along with them tomorrow.
And I understand they're unusually smart, right?
They're very smart, yeah, yeah, and very very social, very interactive with each other.
This book, David, I absolutely love. Absolutely
Thank you.
love this book. It's so much more. It's not. I mean, I love your guides as well, but this is so much more than that because it's these short essays that kind of describe what birds, as the book says, what birds are doing and why. It's literally that, and it's like unbelievably fun to read and fascinating. And of course, the illustrations are gorgeous,
Thank
as
you.
are all your illustrations. So if people give now, they can get this fantastic book. I want to jump right back in with more questions. We have one. How do birds navigate back to the same location every year? For example, the whooping crane that returns to the same refuge in Texas every year. How do they know? I mean, it's very precise, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that is still one of the biggest mysteries about birds, and a lot of other animals besides birds do similar things. The navigation and orientation is just amazing. So a lot has been learned about it, of the details. Birds can navigate by the stars. They can sense the magnetic field like a compass, and even a little bit more detail, so they have some idea of their latitude. Um, and they they recognize landmarks after they've flown a route. One time, they'll recognize landmarks and uh, follow their route by that. They sense they sense the day length. They sense polarized light, so they can tell where the sun is, even when it's hidden behind clouds. And they also have a very um, good sense of time, um, to track the sun's movement across the sky. Um, and all of that together, they also, the sense of smell somehow also has a bearing on their navigation.
Really, the
Birds,
smell?
yeah, birds with their sense of smell experimentally, temporarily blocked, um, don't navigate as well, and that's not understood. Um, so yeah, there's still a lot has been learned, but still huge questions about it. And then the actual observed information, like when a black and white warbler, takes off at night to migrate, um, they can navigate by the stars and all these other things, but they tend to just fly downwind.
Mm.
Whatever direction the wind is blowing is the direction they fly. That's what radar tends to show. Birds are not, the songbirds that migrate at night are not getting up and flying into the wind. They're generally sort of traveling downwind, which takes them off course. It takes them all over the place. They end up hundreds of miles off from the shortest route that would get them where they're going, and somehow they find their way back, get back on course, and many species, they have a summer territory here in the Northeast where they nest, and they'll also have a winter territory somewhere in Central America or South America, some small patch of forest where they return every year to the same spot. So they're kind of commuting from summer home to winter home and finding their way. So yeah, the system is very precise, but at the same time very flexible.
Yeah.
Another thing that's been learned from there's a lot of detailed tracking studies that have been done now with these miniaturized transponder type devices that track a bird's movement continuously. And so all of the black and white warblers are not following the same route, even if they're going to the same region. And they don't necessarily follow the same route every year. They choose different routes, sometimes go across the Gulf of Mexico, sometimes go around. And all of that is just flexibility in the system. And yeah, so it's amazing that they still have the kind of precision that they do along with that flexibility. It's still a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that both of those things can be true, that they can be that precise, but also just be following the wind, which,
Yeah.
is unpredictable. Yeah, it's mind-blowing, really. Question from Gwen, actually a two-part question from Gwen. Gwen says, could you say something about hooded mergansers? Also, any tips about how to feed birds without attracting squirrels and rats? I love having bird feeders, but have stopped because I live in Cambridge and I want to be a good neighbor.
Yeah, well, hooded mergansers, fantastic bird. It's been one of my favorites since I was a kid. And they like fresh water and even smaller ponds surrounded by trees. So I mean, here in Western Massachusetts, there's quite a few places that they like where you can find them. On the coast, they're less common, but they do end up on saltwater, like salt marsh creeks in the winter when the fresh water is frozen. You can see big numbers of them around, like Ipswich, places like that. But they generally don't get out to Cape Cod or farther out, and they're sticking close to the land. And the question about feeding birds, squirrels are just incredibly inventive and persistent, and they will find a way. And there are some really good squirrel resistant bird feeders that will work for a time.
For a time.
Yes, and then the squirrels either chew their way through it or figure out how to get around the barriers. And rats, I guess the issue is keeping food off the ground.
Yeah.
So and that's just a challenge. Rats are so smart and inventive about their feeding. So I guess I mean, there might not be a way around it in that kind of setting, but getting a squirrel-proof bird feeder and putting some kind of screen underneath it to catch any food that falls, to keep food off the ground. And you'd have to be very, very conscientious about maintaining all of that to keep the food off the ground. But that might be a way to feed the birds and not squirrels or rats.
I'm not sure the squirrel-proof bird feeder actually exists. No. I don't know.
No,
I've seen some pretty, and I was hanging one from a tree, and like there's just no way that works. I got one from a sort of a metal post now with a buffle, I think it's but they'll get there. You just gotta do what you can. Catherine from Medfield says, I worry about hummingbirds still being spotted here. Will they make it to their winter home? And she says, my husband wants me to write Old Fuss and Feathers. But I don't see a lot of hummingbirds, but I saw one this year, just one, and it was like a thrill to see a hummingbird in a neighbor's garden, because I never really have them in my garden. But yeah, this does seem a little late. If she's still seeing them, are they going to make it?
Yeah. If you're still seeing a hummingbird now, there's a good chance that it's a rufous hummingbird from the west, a different species than the ruby-throated hummingbird that is around all summer. Most of the hummingbirds that show up this time of year are rufous hummingbirds, not ruby-throated. So that's the first question. And if it's a rufous hummingbird, the birding community would be very excited about knowing about that. It's a rare visitor. They show up 1 or 2 every year in Massachusetts, and often this time of year. And those birds, they're migrating from, say, British Columbia south to Mexico. That's their normal migration route. They would go through the Rocky Mountains and down into Mexico. And the number of rufous hummingbirds that have been coming farther east has increased a lot in the last few decades. There are quite a few now that winter along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and more showing up in even all the way up in the Northeast. Those, as the months go by, weeks go by, their hormonal urge to migrate will wane, and so as it gets into December, their body is going to be telling them that this is where they're spending the winter. And obviously a hummingbird can't really survive the winter in Massachusetts, even with a hummingbird feeder. It just gets too cold.
Yeah. Right.
So if they don't leave now in the next couple of weeks, while they will still have some migration urge, they'll probably be doomed to spending the winter here in Massachusetts. And it's sad to think about that for that individual bird, but you could think of them as pioneers, like the early explorers, pioneering new frontiers. And some of them, the ones that end up in South Carolina, survive the winter, and then they'll migrate back to British Columbia or Alaska, wherever they came from, and nest there and presumably pass on that migration pattern to their offspring. So more rufous hummingbirds end up wintering in South Carolina, and the species then has a wider, like a sort of a backup plan. If Mexico becomes unsuitable for their wintering population anymore, then they'll have a backup population in South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana. So it's all part of the system. Birds wander, they go off course. If they survive, they go back, and it helps the species expand its range.
Interesting. Okay, there's a good spin on that. That's great. Question from Marcel in North Carolina asks, have all the wildfires in Canada had any effect on birds and their migration?
Yeah, it's always really difficult to bird migration is so variable. What we see here of the birds passing through, it's so variable and depends on the local weather and bird movements. It's hard to see those kinds of effects, but there was, towards the end of the summer, there was quite a bit of chatter in the birding community about northern species, birds that breed in the boreal forest, showing up in Massachusetts unusually early, like the beginning of August. Species like Swainson's thrush, bay-breasted warbler, which are really common breeders in northern Quebec, were showing up in Massachusetts weeks earlier than they normally do. And the thinking was that those might be sort of refugees from the forest fires.
Because unlike many other animals, birds have the ability to fly out of a wildfire situation, right? I mean, are they affected the same way that other animals might?
Yeah, well, it's easier for them to escape,
Right.
to fly to Massachusetts, say, and get away from the fires and find food here. But if their nesting territory was in the area that's burned, there's no substitute for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Demo asks, once migration season is over, should I still be filling my feeders?
Yeah, and I think it's fine to feed birds year round. And it gets more important in the winter, during the coldest times and during stormy weather in the winter is when you'll see the most birds at your bird feeder and when the feeders are most helpful to them. And I should say that I think the state of Massachusetts discourages bird feeding in general because of bears. Bears can be active year round, and if bears discover your bird feeders, they're worse than squirrels. And we don't want bears getting accustomed to bird feeders, so you have to be very cautious about that. But winter bears tend to be less active in the winter time, and winter is the season when birds need that extra food the most. There's quite a few studies or a couple of studies on bird feeders that found that bird feeders don't influence birds' survival very much, and most birds that visit feeders use that feeder only as a supplement. They're still getting at least 50% of their food in the wild and only coming to the feeder for a little extra boost. But that changes when there's an ice storm or a big snowstorm and natural food is hard to find. And then the birds get a lot of their food for that brief period from the feeders, and it does help them survive those real difficult times.
I was talking to a friend the other day who was talking about the blue jays in his backyard and how aggressive they are. And I know this is a thing about blue jays. They're kind of bullies, if you were. And he's like, I wonder ask David if there's any way I can, discourage blue jays from being at my feeder. Is there any, is it, they're going to come whether you like it or not, right?
Yeah. There are, I've seen bird feeders set up with a wire cage around them, sort of rabbit wire, with openings too small for blue jays to get through. And if you make something like that, like a cylinder of fencing that's maybe a foot bigger than the feeder, surrounding it, so that little birds like chickadees can just fly through and get to the feeder, but the blue jays will be stopped a foot away. Is very effective, and it will keep the blue jays from getting to the actual bird feeder. They'll still get anything that falls on the ground, and they'll still be attracted.
Okay, I'll let them know. Helen wants to know, do American robins migrate? There were many in my suburban Boston backyard during the spring and summer, but now that it's fall, they're gone.
Yeah, they do migrate. They're more like the eastern phoebe, that they move. They gather. Well, they move where the food is, actually, so I shouldn't compare them to eastern phoebe. They eat fruit for most of the winter, and fruit tends to be very patchy and abundant in one place or in one tree, and then very scarce over a wide area. So the robins gather in big flocks in the fall and then wander. They tend to wander farther south because it's warmer and there'll be more fruit there, but some of them wander east and even north. They'll end up in the maritime provinces of Canada in big numbers if there's a lot of natural food there. So they don't strictly migrate south to the southeastern US. Many of them go there, but then they wander just searching for fruit.
We have a couple more questions I want to try in the last minute that we have here to get to a couple of real quick ones. Emma wants to know when in the year should you take down a hummingbird feeder?
It's safe to take them down now.
Yeah.
Most of the ruby-throated hummingbirds leave by the end of September. They're all gone, basically, migrating south. Okay. You can leave the hummingbird feeders up if you maintain them. Just change the sugar water every few days. Leave them up until now, and you might get a rufous hummingbird visiting, but that's a real long shot.
I want to squeeze a couple more in real quick. One person asked, are there any new techniques for treating windows to prevent migratory birds from hitting them?
Yeah, the American Bird Conservancy has a lot of really good info about that, and they sell some tape and other decals. You need to cover most of or leave only small gaps on the window. So they sell a tape, just a narrow sort of pinstripe tape, or dots that you can stick on the window. And if you keep those less than 4 inches apart, it's very effective. And the stuff they sell is not too obtrusive, and very effective at keeping birds from hitting the window.
Val says, here on Cape Cod, I've noticed recently that buffleheads in particular form a circle, swim very actively in a circle, and then dive repeatedly. Are they doing what dolphin pods will do, round up underwater prey for feeding?
I don't think that's about feeding. I think it's probably a social activity, but I don't actually know. It's a really interesting observation.
Okay. And Susan says, I recently moved to the marsh of Plum Island. I wonder what birds will remain for the winter and how local birds will respond while the migrating birds gather here in fall and spring. I just saw robins gathering all last week. Are they coming from more northern places and staying here or leaving?
Yeah, well, oh yeah, you'll get to see all kinds of things happening there through the winter, and it'll change every week. Will change, new things will show up. And the robins, like I was saying, they're just in search of fruit. They gather in these flocks, and those robins there at Plum Island, some of them might have come from Ontario, some might have come from even, North Dakota, Iowa. They just wander. Some might have come from Pennsylvania, some might have come from Nova Scotia. The flock might go to Nova Scotia. They just gather in groups and wander. So yeah, it's fun to see them and think about where they might have all come from and where they might end up.
That is sort of the thing of it, right? We admire them, we watch them, and we think about all of the incredible things that they've done, that they've seen, that they're doing. How much we know about them and how much more we have to learn. Unfortunately, that is all of our time. David, we could do this all day long. There's so many great questions, and my apologies to everybody who put in fantastic questions, and we just didn't have time to get to them all. But David, it's just always such a treat, and I always learn so much from talking to you. Thank you for coming back and for having this conversation with us and with sharing your knowledge with all of our listeners and our viewers.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And thanks. They're great questions. It's always fun to think about all these things. So
it is always fun. And again, thank you to everybody who's joined us. Have a wonderful weekend, and please come back and join us for more of these conversations. Take care.